NeverDead was one of the lowest rated games to come out in 2012, and one of the last original IPs produced by Konami. It was a game that I remember being excited for after hearing about it at Konami's legendary 2010 press conference.
Camera okay? Hello everybody. It's great for me to be here, see you all, and present our title for you. Hey Tommy, please introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, my name is Thomas Nagano and I work with the development team as PR from Japan. So as you guys were able to see in the trailer, Bryce, our hero, gets dismembered during gameplay. But it's alright though because he can pick up his body parts and limbs and
Hey Tommy, are you okay? What's wrong with you?
What are you doing? Confidential that we have a real title. Put it back.
So sorry.
Near the release of the game, I was turned away from NeverDead by the abysmal reviews it was receiving universally across the game's media circuit. The failure of the game to impress reviewers was surprising to me, considering that the director, Shinta Janiri, was well experienced in making excellent games. Janiri worked on some of my favorite games of all time, such as Policenauts and Metal Gear Solid. He was also the director of the highly underrated Metal Gear Acid games on the PSP. Shinada collaborated with UK-based developers Rebellion, who are behind the Sniper Elite games, and most of the Judge Dredd titles. To his credit, Shinada was so intent on doing his best to create NeverDead that he temporarily moved from Japan to Oxford, England to oversee the development. Since we're now living in a post-Konami era, at least for the time being, I wanted to take a look into their legacy of titles and one of their last attempts at creating something new. To be completely honest, I didn't give NeverDead any consideration until a friend picked up the game for me as what I assumed to be a gag gift at the time, and being influenced by the groupthink reviews on the internet, I still didn't bother to learn how the mechanics work, and I put the game down pretty quickly. I mean, why should I have given the game a chance when 1UP said NeverDead exemplifies failure with remarkable success? Or when Owen Good of Kotaku said, it doesn't matter whether this was meant to be serious or for fun and silliness. I'm saying no aspect of this game was enjoyable. It is unfun at any price. Or when Jim Sterling of Destructoid fame labeled the game as an embarrassment fit only for mockery. 2 out of 10. A game that earned a 2 out of 10 had to have meant that it was downright broken and unplayable, right? Well, I wanted to see if there was any truth to these criticisms. I wanted to see the game in action for myself. If for nothing else, then to have a couple of cheap laughs. Before I begin my review, I created a list of the 10 most common and weirdest complaints a series of reviewers had with the game, and I'm going to address them as I go along.
Here are the top 10 NeverDead reviewer complaints in no particular order.
Generic shooter mechanics / repetitive combat, few enemy types, clumsy partner AI, style over substance. Protagonist is too weak, can be attacked during cutscenes, penis and anus imagery, bad writing, new metal music, and no multiplayer community. Keep in mind, I played through NeverDead twice on my PlayStation 3 on normal difficulty for the purpose of this review. This is Hikikomori Media, in defense of NeverDead. Bad writing. Bad writing is a complaint that is primarily a subjective one, as we all come to the table with different tastes and expectations. The same could be said about bad gameplay, but we'll get to that later. I consider bad writing to be a trait that I don't particularly care about when it comes to a video game. If a game's story is great, then it's icing on the cake, and if it sucks, well then sometimes that's a treat in itself and it's fun picking apart what's bad about it. Take a look at Deadly Premonition. It doesn't have the best writing in the world, but what is there is quite entertaining. Ultimately, story does not matter to me, but since we are now in a market where most games can get a pass for story alone, I guess it's worth looking into for posterity. Let's run down NeverDead's story, shall we? NeverDead opens 500 years ago in the past. Here we meet our pretty boy demon-slaying protagonist, Bryce Boltzmann, and his wife Cypher as they confront the evil frog demon, Sangria.
I simply adore that shade of salmon pink. Your arrogant words are dripping with pride and overconfidence. It'll lend a tangy touch to your otherwise salty human flesh. You see, we demons can taste the color of the human soul.
The introductory cutscene is deceptively gorgeous, and the preceding battle leads the player into some head-scratching questions, like why does Bryce have a machine gun in the medieval era? The intro does set up false expectations for the rest of the game with its medieval setting, but that's an intentional move. We cut to a 500-year flash forward, where we are presented with a much more weathered and worn depiction of Bryce. You see, in the past, Bryce was cursed by the demon lord Astaroth when he shoved a demon eye into Bryce's head, making Bryce immortal. The 500 years haven't been kind to our anti-hero. Now Bryce is spending his eternity in bars and slaying demons with NADA, the National Anti-Demon Agency, to earn a living. The game truly begins after Bryce and his partner Arcadia receive reports that demons were spotted at an old hospital, and they're sent out to investigate. The rest of the story flashes back and forth between the 500-year jump, and we learn more details about Bryce's journey. Is NeverDead's narrative about the journey of an immortal man an original one? No. There have been plenty of stories before it to tackle the concept of immortality. Take a look at the Highlander series.
Nein! Erst musst du mich erschießen!
Whatever you say, Jack. You're the master race.
Or Lost Odyssey on the Xbox 360, if you feel like crying your eyes out about how shitty being an immortal person can be. What makes Bryce's story unique is the subversion of expectations in the beginning, in a way standing as a parody of medieval knights in shining armor and how age can change a person. Bryce goes from a gallivant demon-slaying husband to an Ash Williams one-liner machine and alcoholic mercenary who is constantly berated by his partner Arcadia.
It's about time. There's someone who has the right idea.
Unfortunately, we can't make it back to HQ today. We should head back to my safe house until then.
Inviting me back to your place, huh? Oh, this is a first. Whoa.
I will kill you if you touch any of my stuff, like this.
Oh!
What?
I feel as if the bad writing criticism comes from the reviewers disliking the puns and action hero jokes that Bryce shouts in battle. God help them if they ever play Devil May Cry. Instead of tasking its writers with scribbling bad dismemberment and decapitation puns, Rebellion should have hired a writer who can tell a story, of which there is none to speak of here. What the hell's wrong with decapitation puns? Please tell me I'm not the only one who felt the film Austin Powers was snubbed at the '97 Academy Awards.
Not a good time to lose one's head.
Indeed.
While I'll give it to the reviewers that the writing isn't groundbreaking, it still was fairly entertaining and not offensive in any regard. There's no doubt about it, there is definitely a story going on in NeverDead, but it's primarily told through exchanges between Bryce and Arcadia in the heat of battle. Even still, there's at least an hour's worth of cutscenes in the game, which, knowing Konami games, they're totally showing some restraint here to say the least. As far as exposition is concerned, there's an entire level where all you do is hang out with the crew and talk about the events that have occurred in Arcadia's apartment. I quite like the breaks in action where Bryce and company just chill out in Arcadia's home, even if it's just for him to nab a few panties for comedic relief. What the hell's the purpose of those scenes in Arcadia's apartment? Who the hell cares if I can put my head in a washing machine? Oh, and good. Kotaku. NeverDead is primarily a comedy with a few dramatic beats here and there. If you have a functioning sense of humor and aren't going in expecting a Greek epic, then you'll laugh at the absurdity of immortality and enjoy the given story. Generic shooter mechanics / repetitive combat. Many reviewers complain that NeverDead's combat was just another generic third-person shooter that wears on the player quickly with its repetitive nature. I find this accusation couldn't be further from the truth, as NeverDead takes typical shooter mechanics and turns them on their head. You get it? The core gameplay is centered around slaying demons. Bryce has a few different methods of attack. He has 2 guns that are tied to each individual arm. He can swap out each weapon on the assigned arm to mix and match for the given situation. Bryce also has the ability to rip off an arm and throw it across the room as bait for enemies, or throw it in enemies' stomachs to fire on them from the inside. I love when Bryce loses an arm in the middle of battle, and I like watching it flail across the ground while still firing. I've never seen something like that in a game before. Bryce's other method of defense, and what I feel to be his primary mode of attack, is his butterfly blade. Now, fans of Metal Gear Rising will feel right at home with this blade, as you can slice and dice your way through enemies and the environment with ease. Some complaints were lodged about the sword's controls, where you're required to hold R1 and use the analog stick to swing, and while I agree they are unusual, you will get used to them with some practice. It only took me about 15 minutes to understand it. What sets NeverDead apart from most shooters are the destructible environments developed by Rebellion. You see, Bryce can use the environment to his advantage in combat. When you enter a room or level, there are generally pillars, walls, large objects, explosive barrels to destroy or smash. It's essential that you take a look around at your environment and lure your enemies to those areas to trap them under the rubble or explosions. This mechanic can be easily overlooked in the heat of battle. My best advice is to just shoot everything in sight and have fun with it. Bryce can also use his immortal nature to engulf his body in flames, or electricity to imbue his weapons with extra damage, or to light up the areas. There's also a way Bryce can gain experience and skills. There is a neat leveling system built into the game. On the ground are shiny red shards that Bryce can collect, and hidden gold statues in every level that give Bryce additional experience points. Destroying monsters and bosses and collecting these shards will all go towards gaining more experience for Bryce. At the end of a chapter, you can spend these experience points to buy attributes for Bryce. Perhaps you find Bryce's head rolls a little too slowly. Well, there's a perk for that. You get experience boosts, destructible damage upgrades, exploding limbs, the list goes on. The developers specifically recommend going with the slow motion perk that makes the game resemble Max Payne, and it does make it easier to dodge projectiles in the heat of battle. I'd also recommend it. Keep in mind that each perk takes up a certain number of slots, so you can't equip everything until you have the required space for it. You can buy additional slots as the game progresses. Change up your perks to adjust to your own playstyle. I tended to go with more sword upgrades myself. It's good to note that experience and perks carry over to every new game, even if you haven't finished the game. So if you're having trouble getting past a part, just farm the first couple of levels for experience and then just restart with all the perks that you want. There are over 50 unique perks to unlock during the game, and it truly does change up strategies you will use. Protagonist is too weak. This criticism confounded me the most, as Bryce isn't weak at all. He's far from it due to his immortality. Thinking as a developer, the biggest challenge that I could see making a game about an immortal protagonist is creating some sort of fail state for Bryce to enter. I assume the weakness complaint originates from how Bryce can be torn limb from limb. As Bryce takes damage from enemies, he will lose one or all of his limbs. This typically doesn't bother Bryce, as he's so determined to battle, he'll often end up hopping around on one leg or ripping off his arm and throwing it to distract enemies. I absolutely love this mechanic, and it sets NeverDead apart from everything else. The losing limbs mechanic makes the player pay attention to the protagonist's well-being in a different manner. You have to look to ensure all of Bryce's limbs are attached and recover the limbs when they're missing. You have a couple of options to get your limbs back here. The usual method is finding out where the limbs flew off to and dodge rolling over them to reattach them to Bryce. You can also wait a little bit for them to grow back on their own, or dip into your regeneration circle to regrow them on the fly. If you're a little low on your regen ability, you can pick up a potion that will refill your circle. Keep in mind, if Bryce loses both arms or legs, he cannot swing his sword. So I recommend just dodge rolling over your limbs when you lose them and keep on fighting. If you've taken too much damage or an enemy executes a special attack, Bryce can become decapitated. When Bryce becomes decapitated, this is when he becomes vulnerable. It's the only way the player can enter a fail state. There are enemies that wander the field looking to inhale Bryce's various limbs. Bryce's objective when decapitated is getting his head back to his shoulders, so he can reattach it before his head gets inhaled by one of these enemies. If you get swallowed by an enemy, then you have to perform the only QTE in the game. All you gotta do is press X once to stop the arrow in the vomit zone. When successfully landed, an enemy will barf up Bryce's head. If unsuccessful, well, Bryce will spend an eternity being slowly digested by the demon, which means game over for the player. Even if you aren't a fan of NeverDead, give credit where it's due. For a modern third-person shooter, avoiding QTEs to solve its design problems is next to unheard of nowadays. One problem players might have is with the head rolling mechanic being somewhat random, as Bryce's head's gonna fly all over the place sometimes. Sometimes it'll land right next to his body, and sometimes it will fly halfway across the map. You can adjust the speed of your head rolls or jumps depending on what skill you have equipped, so getting back to your body can be a challenge if you're not equipped for the task. In fairness, I did have a couple of issues in the game where debris covered Bryce's head and I had to hop my way out of the situation, but it never got to the point where I had to reboot the game. If I ever felt like I couldn't get back to Bryce's body in time, I would just hit the regenerate limbs button and carry on with the slaying. I can understand why reviewers didn't like the limb dropping mechanic, as it can bring battles to a halt to hop back onto Bryce's shoulders. But after playing the game for a bit, I grew to understand this mechanic and I anticipated it and didn't mind it over time and found the challenge to be quite unique. Having a weak protagonist does not make NeverDead a poorly designed game. If one of the gripes about NeverDead is being a clone of a third-person shooter, which it's not, then let's examine what the typical protagonist in a modern third-person shooter is like. In a modern third-person shooter, you're typically a badass action star with an unlimited arsenal and a world of chest-high walls. Whenever the chips are down, this protagonist can QTE their way out of any situation, including punching boulders in a volcano, and when they're taking too much damage, they can just chill out for a minute and have their life regen on its own. Modern players have become conditioned to accept this self-regenerating action hero as the standard by which games should follow. So when a game like NeverDead tries something new by taking the power away from the player and forces the player to reevaluate their strategies from the games they're used to, in which they could just run out in the open, take a hail of bullets, and then regen behind a cover wall, reviewers want to cry foul on the game design. Since when did having a weak protagonist become bad game design? The survival horror genre is filled with them. Would Silent Hill 2 be as terrifying and engaging if James Sunderland was a roided out no-neck with unlimited health? No. Taking the power away from the protagonist adds to the challenge and balances the game design. Nowadays, people love games with weaker protagonists. Just take a look at how much Dark Souls makes its way around the circle jerk for being innovative with the degree of challenge presented by taking away the power from the player. The NES library was filled with games that would implement one hit in your dead gameplay. All these points are moot when you consider that NeverDead is not that difficult at all. As mentioned, Bryce can regrow his limbs at will or find his way back to his body. But if you suck enough at NeverDead, you can always crank down the difficulty to easy mode until you get better. Not to mention that as you progress through the game, Bryce will get additional abilities that will make him more powerful. To play devil's advocate, NeverDead has a bit of a learning curve, but it's not that steep once you get the hang of how the world works. If your head gets vacuumed up by an enemy, you have an unlimited amount of time to focus on centering the arrow in the vomit zone, so the game provides a second chance. If you fail, then you don't have much to worry about either because the game has frequent checkpoints and it reloads the level instantly after death. The real question I have for the reviewers is how much hand-holding do you want out of your games? A shitty game is a shitty game. My skill at playing it has nothing to do with it. Why don't you play it if the concept is so intriguing and get back to me? Ellen Good. Go back on. Few enemy types. Not counting bosses, we've only got 3 enemy types. Puppies, spoons, grandbabies. I'm not counting missile/gun spoons or explodo puppies. Oh, and good. I'm not exactly sure that few enemy types is an actual criticism that can be levied against NeverDead, unless you didn't play the game. From my count, and yeah, I am including boss fights as an enemy type because why wouldn't you consider them an enemy type? And I consider missiles and machine guns to be different types of deadly objects. There were around 20 different types of enemies. Sure, the roster isn't as varied as a Final Fantasy game, but there were far more enemy types in NeverDead compared to video game news outlet darling The Last of Us. But does NeverDead really have only a few enemy types? Going strictly from memory, NeverDead had dog demons, rolling demons, spoon demons, womb demons, missile shooting demons, machine gun shooting demons, bat demons, hula hoop bear trap demons, spike ball of death demons, demon demons, hippo demons, avant-garde demons, shield and morningstar demons, razor blade spoon demons, which is a reskin, giant snake-headed demon that turns into a flying arm-eating bug demon, giant quarterback demons, double crossing glowing guy demon, vamp from Metal Gear demon, Lord of the Demons demon, and I'm probably forgetting some. On the other hand, The Last of Us had the infected, clickers, bloaters, humans, and that one deer. What I'm getting at is the amount of enemies does not matter, as long as their implementation makes sense within the world. If the enemies provide a decent challenge, and more importantly, are fun to fight, then why should the amount of enemies matter? The enemies of NeverDead force the player to employ a variety of strategies to clear out an area. Some require guns to defeat, others can be killed by swords, but you'll find using the environment is usually your best bet. NeverDead's enemy design shines best during the boss fights, as the bosses are treated more like puzzles, just like your standard Zelda game. My personal favorite boss fight is the museum bug boss, where the strategy requires you to toss an arm in the mouth of the boss and use your severed arm to shoot its stomach from the inside. Like a normal game, the boss fights get incrementally more challenging as you go along, with the last couple of bosses being a true challenge. You learn the enemy's patterns, you find out their weak points, and if you really need to, you can restart the level and equip the perks to fit the situation. I don't see where that got lost in translation here. I guess I was just too busy killing everything in sight to stop and count the amount of enemy types in order to decide if I was having a good time. I'm sorry, I'll try harder next time. Style over substance. I'm not gonna spend too much time arguing if the game is trying to be more stylistic than other third-person shooters out there, but reviewers made claims that NeverDead was attempting to emulate the style of Suda51. They made it out like the game was attempting to be the next No More Heroes or Shadows of the Damned. I didn't feel like NeverDead was trying to deliberately rip off the style of Suda51. I mean, that guy is just way too unique in his own right to even borrow anything from. But speaking of borrowing, I didn't hear anyone complain about Lollipop Chainsaw having a lead character be a decapitated head that attaches himself to bodies to solve puzzles, but I digress. What I'm saying is, I can't fault the developers for taking inspiration from other ideas. But that claim in and of itself is kinda hard to prove unless the director deliberately states that yes, Suda51 was my inspiration. But as long as they're not blatantly ripping off their muses, I'm fine with it. Nothing wrong with improving on previous models. Let's face it, NeverDead was not the first game to tackle immortality as a game mechanic or as a storytelling device. The Wario Land series experimented with invulnerability with its protagonist and shifted the gameplay to cater to more puzzle solving and coin collecting. In 2005, Stubbs the Zombie starred a dead protagonist that could remove his own body parts, use them as weapons, and regrow them on the spot. And last but not least, Mistwalker's Lost Odyssey followed protagonist Kaim as he ventured through life as an immortal man that begins to remember the several lifetimes he had lived and left behind. Can I see any sort of stylistic influence or outright copying from Suda51's work in NeverDead? No, not really, unless you want to consider all off-the-wall storytelling to be as borrowed from Suda51. It's okay for directors to dip into the abstract and bizarre, and it's okay for stories to be off-the-wall entertaining, and directors shouldn't be called a ripoff for having highly stylized games. It's just a shitty accusation with no basis to back it up. And you can't even jack off a lightsaber in this game. Penis and anus imagery. Jesus, Jim, don't act like you're above a little anus play in games. You gave Splatterhouse a 7.5, and you literally have to rip the anus out of your foes to defeat them. You even said, from pulling out a demon's lungs to punching through a monster's puckered red raw anus, the splatter kills will make you laugh, if nothing else. You're not above a little penis play either. Let's put that aside. I guess I wouldn't call myself a penis and anus imagery aficionado, but I do know it when I see it, and I didn't see it in NeverDead. There isn't a boss in the game that needs to be shot in the anus to defeat it, but to try and make sense of this, I think he was referring to the first boss, the Sword Pig. It's basically a giant hippo with a swordfish spear snout. To defeat it, all you have to do is slice at its legs a bunch, and you can shoot at its glowing yellow weak spot, but it's not really an anus, it's more of a tail with an angel statue attached to it, like all the other enemies in the game. I'm not one to argue anal semantics here, but this is literally the only example I could find of an anus throughout the entire game. I tried to take notes to find any sort of a fart sound effect or a poo-poo coming out of a monster, and there's nothing to be found within NeverDead. This is probably the only thing that could be considered shocking, and ooh boy, how shocking is it to attack a monster's butt? Well, here it is. This is the enemy defeated. Are you shocked?
Given the opportunity to do so many creative things with a character who can tear off his head, NeverDead instead jammed its own up its ass. Oh, and good. God dang it.
That is a very shocking and tasteless attempt at humor. I can't believe someone would write that. The penis-nosed demon Jim was referring to is Sangria. Speaking as an amateur phallic philanthropist, I can even tell that Sangria's nose is a nod to Victorian-era party masks, but no, I guess Jim didn't let the blatant Victorian wig and tights throw him off the dick trail. I couldn't take away anything from this criticism other than thinking this might have been Jim's projection or his very own attempt at being shocking in his review. I never once thought NeverDead was trying to be shocking, but more in the lines of a typical comedy with arcade-like gameplay. Something along the lines of Smash TV. I mean, how can something be shocking without at least including one dead baby joke in the writing? Incidentally, there is a dead baby in the game. Can be attacked during cutscenes. I'm just going to address this head on. I'm going to say that no, you cannot be attacked during cutscenes. Want to know why? The cutscenes are pre-rendered, so no game engine assets are being used. Not to mention, the cutscenes generally take place before a chapter begins, before you fight a boss, after you defeat a boss, or at the end of a chapter. Times when there's no action happening on the field. Not once in my entire 2 playthroughs of the game was I ever attacked or killed during a cutscene. Am I calling Jim a liar? No, at least not in this instance, but the way Jim bolded and italicized that portion of his review made it sound like this was a frequent occurrence that would be experienced by all players. If it ever happened at all, which I doubt it did, I find it strange that not one other reviewer had shared the same experience of being attacked during a cutscene. And for a group chomping at the bit to rake NeverDead through the coals for the smallest transgression, I would consider this sort of game-breaking bug low-hanging fruit, and I'm gonna chalk this up to bullshit until proven otherwise. I didn't feel like doing a British accent, so here's a quote from Jim Sterling. The reviewers are referring to Bryce's partner Arcadia, who is not even with you for half the game, and she goes off on her own most of the times, but when she's with you, all she does is shoot at enemies from afar. Yes, she can be knocked over, but reviving her isn't really a big deal. You just go over once and then you press square and then she's back alive. Throughout my playthrough of the game, she was only knocked over twice, and one of them was a scripted event that teaches you how to revive her, and the other time was whenever I was lobbing some grenades around and accidentally knocked her over. As mentioned, she mostly just stays out of the way and helps fire at enemies from a distance, but doesn't really do too much else. Yeah, she's not the best partner in the world, but she doesn't hinder the game either. Even motherfucking Owen Good came out and said, "There's a puppy, there's a spoon. Thanks, Arcadia. You're a very helpful partner. At least reviving you is only a single button press. Owen Good." And that motherfucker didn't even beat the game. I know this next segment's gonna be a little bit off topic here, but it was too batshit crazy to leave out. Nothing tops the madness that Casey Lynch of IGN said about Arcadia. Bryce's partner Arcadia Maximil is a mortal agent who is confounding as Bryce is unlikable. She clearly has daddy issues, preferring to do her top secret life-threatening demon hunting work in a deep cut, one-piece sweater blouse dress that barely covers her privates, with choice lines like, "Ew, that was gross," and a perpetually accentuated bust line. The developer casts her lovingly rendered bosom and derriere as the star more often than the character herself. Let me ask you guys something. When did game reviews become Freudian analysis? At no point in the game did I look at Arcadia and think, there's a woman with an Electra complex. Can someone please explain to me when having boobs on a character became a criminal offense? I mean, you don't have to have a cock-shaped nose to smell the agenda coming off that review. Not only is Arcadia a classic helpless princess in need of constant rescuing, she's portrayed as stupid, ditzy, self-obsessed, and objectified by her costumers and the game's peekaboo camera angles. Looking through a crazy-eyed doo-doo lens, I can't even see how Arcadia could be considered a damsel in distress. I mean, in the opening cutscene, she takes out one of those puppies on her own without any help, and when we're first introduced to Bryce, it's only after Arcadia kicks open the fucking door and shoots him in the goddamn head to wake him up. Arcadia constantly shoots Bryce throughout the entire fucking game to get what she wants.
Well, what was that for?
Arcadia owns her own apartment, she's the top agent in Nada, and she bosses Bryce around without even paying the guy. Who's the real victim here?
I will kill you if you touch any of my stuff. like this.
Oh!
What?
What the hell was that for?
What?
If anything, she should be a feminist fucking icon. I don't get it. This is a fictionalized character, not a real human. You're taking Western feminist philosophies and applying them to a Japanese creator and expecting him to play by your rules. But don't take it from me, take it from the horse's mouth himself, Shinta Najiri, on his basis for creating Arcadia.
Everybody, do you see that sexy character in the background, Arcadia? Man, do I like those knee-high stockings and that miniskirt.
Oh, what the
Oh, you know,
fuck?
thinking of that, there was somebody in college that I really had a big crush on. She looks just like Arcadia, and personality I think was the same too. I would ask her on a date every single day that I saw her. I tried maybe about 20, maybe even 30 times, and she kept on saying no, so, you know, I finally gave up, but I still think about her when I see Arcadia.
I take everything I said back about the feminist being crazy in this one case. This guy just doesn't pass the smell test. If anybody out there has access to the internet, please look up missing person cases around the same time Shinta went to college. Any missing girls that match the description of Arcadia from NeverDead. He's your culprit. He did it.
Man, do I like that ponytail of hers? Well, personally, I actually like ponytails. I like short hair, long hair, perm, curled. Well, basically I like any kind of hair.
Nu metal music. The soundtrack takes a page from early 90s white trash kidcore games. It's akin to Road Rash, Twisted Metal, or one of the many ECW titles. I both loathe and love the fact that Megadeth got together to make an original song for NeverDead. Now, I can't play the Megadeth song in question, but the soundtrack isn't primarily just nu metal. You have your synthesized beats, piano medleys, and even some J-pop thrown in for good measure. If you absolutely hate nu metal and it's a deal breaker for you, then I suggest turning off the in-game music and spinning your own. Torture this soundtrack is not. It's actually pretty good in some parts. I recommend giving it a listen. No multiplayer community. Out of all the complaints, I would say that this one is 100% accurate. I tried to join one multiplayer game at least once every day since starting this review, but not surprisingly, no one was playing NeverDead in 2015. I believe there might be a few explanations as to why. First off, most of the reviewers received NeverDead at or near launch, before gamers even had the game in the first place. Even after launch, not many people were likely playing because at its core, NeverDead is mostly a single player game. Either that or they were trying to beat the game first because many of the multiplayer assets are unlocked after beating single player. I have zero experience with NeverDead's online, and I haven't been able to find a review outside of Co-Optimus which spoke highly of the co-op and horde modes. Not to mention, the negative reviews likely led to low sales, so any chance of a multiplayer community forming was destroyed from the get-go. Even still, most multiplayer is shoehorned into modern games because companies find single-player games to be a large financial risk. I don't fault NeverDead for not having a community, but one day, I hope to play with a group of crazy like-minded individuals who can sit back and enjoy limbs and bullets spraying over a destructible landscape. So here it is, the long-awaited final thoughts section to close out my defense of 2012's NeverDead. Since I left the video series hanging, I had the opportunity to pick up the Xbox 360 version, so let's give it a spin and see what's different about it. Now, the first thing I noticed is how deep the colors look on the 360 version. For some reason, the PS3 makes the colors look brighter and sometimes more washed out. 360 black levels look far more accurate to the game world. I do want to make mention that the texture work does look a little bit crisper on the 360 version, and there's not as much texture pop-in going on here. The loading times are leaps and bounds faster than the PS3 version, and that's due to me being able to install the 360 version to the hard drive, which is not possible in the PS3 version, unfortunately. Screen tearing plagues the PS3 version, especially when a lot of strenuous action is going on, like when Bryce is destroying all the environments around him. For some reason, and I see this with a lot of games, that the PS3 just disables VSync entirely, even though it's capable of it. But I guess this is just a common theme with developers that worked on the PS3 back then, since the architecture was overtly complicated during the time and there wasn't a ton of literature until near the end of the PS3's life cycle. The only downside I can think of between the Xbox 360 version versus the PS3 version comes down to controllers for some gamers. Like, some gamers just prefer the comfort of the DualShock 3 and others gamers like the trigger grips on the Xbox 360. I tend to prefer the Xbox 360 controller more, and I didn't think I would do that, but the more I played NeverDead, the more it made sense to me gameplay-wise to have those triggers. Nowadays, both copies of NeverDead run for around under $10, and for that price I think it's totally worth it. Upon retrospect, to frame it in the context of when it was released in 2012, I do not think NeverDead would have been worth the full $60 price tag. I guess I don't look at games in that context because I typically just wait until the price comes down on any title before I snatch it up, but I think the reason why the price point was set at the full retail amount was because of the shoehorned in multiplayer community aspects, and which to this date I've still never played, so I can't really comment on it. I think the multiplayer aspects were shoehorned in due to Konami meddling in there somewhere. If anyone's to blame for some of the issues with this game, definitely pointing that finger towards Konami. Now, I think if this would have come out at the $30 to $40 range without the multiplayer, it would have been more warmly received, and perhaps, maybe, it would have had multiplayer patched in at a later time and have a thriving community with more players active in it. I think many of the criticisms of this game come from Eastern and Western gaming philosophies not matching or mending well together. On a surface level glance, this game is very Western presenting. It has aspects that attracts more Xbox 360 players with guns and explosions, wisecracking protagonists, and a nu metal soundtrack. Yet NeverDead is still steeped in a very Japanese game design core with its experimental gameplay ideas, bizarre anime-like flashback cutscenes, and the absolutely brutal boss design, especially the last two bosses in particular. And in Japan, it was well loved by Famitsu, who gave this title a score of 32 out of 40, which was a far cry from the Western gaming journo reaction. Maybe this was just an issue of cultural taste here. Personally, I would say NeverDead is a good game. It's a lot of fun, and every time I went back to play it, I just got invested in it and I wanted to continue playing. It's something that I enjoy, but I know it's not the greatest game ever made. I'm not gonna compare it to a AAA title, but I don't expect all the games that I enjoy to be AAA. I guess I tend to enjoy games that take more risks, even when they don't pay off completely, and I only have one major gripe with NeverDead out of anything that was presented in this video, and that was the insanity of the last couple of boss fights. Once you get to the last level, it's just kind of a shooting gallery where you go through all the waves of the different enemies you fought throughout the game. And then you get to what I call the Vamp from Metal Gear fight, where you get into this fight with this guy who's throwing knives at you and kicking your head off. Now, I found this fight to be really difficult the first time I played through, and that's because I didn't conserve my ammo. Like, I had grenade launchers and shotgun ammo, and I was just wasting it, but I wasn't aiming my shots properly, and I found that out, and I started to adapt. This boss fight is actually quite easy when you lob a grenade at him when he's wide open, and then you go over there and chop off one of his arms. It's kind of like a three-phase fight where you have to chop off both arms and then his head, and you do this through 2 rounds where he gets faster and more powerful. It's a longer than necessary fight if you're not planning out your shots, and he can regen his health if you're not keeping up with him. Shotgun ammo does respawn, so just find out where that point is, grab the shotgun ammo, and then just use your 10 shells like a survival horror game. Just wait for the prime opportunity, shoot them, and you'll have no problem. The very last boss fight is where you fight the Lord of the Demons that killed Bryce's wife and cursed him with immortality. Now, you can only attack him by shooting him with bullets that travel through these portals that Nikki summons on the field. And it seems easy enough, and it is, until you have to face the gauntlet of enemies that are roaming this very small field, and then the giant baddie is out in the background slamming his snake arms down, creating an earthquake that makes your head pop off. It's not exactly easy until you get the timing down. I also want to make mention that the portals only last for a few seconds before they're gone, so you constantly have to move around the field finding where these portals spawn, and then they'll stop spawning, so you have to kill all the enemies on the field to make them spawn again. Now, I'm not saying this is a hard fight, it's not at all. It's just an annoyingly tedious one if you don't know what to do. The boss telegraphs all of his attacks. He'll say, "Perish!" or something to that effect before he slams his arms down, so you do have some time to hop around or dodge roll before your head explodes, so it's not too bad. He'll also fire off a huge laser, but only after a few seconds of aiming, which you can easily dodge, and you can use it to your advantage because he uses those lasers to kill some of the enemies on the field, so it's really getting the big boss to do what you want. The big issue here is that the developers made this boss fight more busy than it needed to be. We don't need little demons roaming the field in tandem with the Lord of the Demon in the background. He's enough of a challenge. When I faced him my second playthrough of the game, he wasn't as bad, and that's mainly because I changed all my perks to reflect this specific battle. I changed all of my abilities to gun upgrades, since I knew I'd be shooting through those portals, and I knew that I'd be dismembered more than usual, so I focused on speeding up my rolling for my head and my regeneration perks, and you know what? The battle went pretty smoothly. The level does give you plenty of potions and ammo to complete it, but I can see without the right perks, this fight could drag on, and it did my first time through. I think it was this fight in conjunction with lack of player experimentation that led me to believe that's where a majority of the low review scores from the Western game journalists originated. They just weren't having a good time because they weren't trying out new things. NeverDead wants you to experiment with different play styles with the inclusion of the character perks, and yeah, that sort of thing can be tasking for reviewers under a deadline, but it's essential if you want to have a better experience. You've got to adapt to the situation. NeverDead is one of those kind of multiple playthroughs type of game. If you really want to get into the greater depth with the abilities and understand all the nuances that come with this game, then you gotta keep playing. Now, you can make it through just fine with what you get through in your first playthrough, but the magic comes in with playthrough number 2, when you have a grasp for how it all works. In order to get some of the funnest abilities in the game, you need to rack up a lot of experience points, and you can get a decent amount of XP in a regular playthrough if you seek out all the little hidden angel statues and red shards. However, the way the XP was doled out relied heavily on the player trying out the multiplayer to earn additional XP to carry over to the single player game. The multiplayer communities were next to non-existent during the time when most of these reviewers had their copies, so we can assume that they didn't get terribly far without the multiplayer XP bonuses. One thing that I do like about this game is that you aren't completely stuck with the abilities you've purchased, as you have one giant pool of XP that you earned over your collective total playthroughs. If you want to rebuild Bryce, you can start a new game with all of your earned experience points waiting for you to spend it any way you want to. Initially, I had built up Bryce with a bunch of sword perks, thinking that a melee-only build would serve me well, but for some boss fights, close range isn't always possible, and I really appreciate the feature to swap out your abilities on the fly to adapt to the situation. At any time, you hit select and you're in the ability menu, and you can drag and drop whatever you like. You can buy and swap out as many perks as you like, so long as you have the slots to hold them. Now, upon further experimentation, I found that like abilities do stack for additional bonuses. Like the extra experience abilities, they all stack so you end up getting a fuck ton of experience points. There's so many different ability combinations that it would be impossible to cover them all in one video. Out of all the reviews, there wasn't much, if any, talk about the abilities, which makes me wonder how deeply the reviewers experimented before dropping the game and giving it such a low score. One more thing I really want to appreciate here is the destructible environments were much more clever than I gave them credit for. My first time through, I didn't pay too much attention to how well the environments are laid out for destruction. When I replayed the museum level, it truly brought this whole mousetrap feel that Rebellion was going for to my mind. There are these huge set pieces to drop crumble, or roll over and crush the enemies. I found that I had much more success taking down some of the womb demons by looking for objects to crush them with or barrels to explode near them. It reminds me a lot of a Red Faction game, and it's just a ton of fun to shoot things and see how they're gonna break and where they're gonna land. It's a lot of fun, just give it a chance. I also spent more time ripping off Bryce's head and going for a lovely roll around most of the maps trying to explore them and find the missing collectibles. There's not a lot of literature out there about NeverDead, so I didn't have the inclination to search out an FAQ to find all the collectibles. I just started paying more attention to the levels and found them as I went. I guess as any normal gamer should. Now, out of all this NeverDead drama, I want to bring the focus back to one man, Shinta Najiri. Now, this guy put his reputation and livelihood on the line to make this game happen. He flew out to Great Britain by his lonesome and worked with a Western company, Rebellion, to make something ambitious. He lived there for over a year working on this game. Shinta learned English and went along with this goofy-ass skit at Konami's zany press conference with the hopes that Western gamers would accept him and enjoy his game. Living in the shadow of Kojima at Konami, he was trying to make a name for himself, and up until NeverDead, he had a fantastic resume of works, which included Police Knots, Metal Gear Solid 3, and the Metal Gear Acid series. Then came NeverDead and all the fallout that came with it. Without drudging up the who or the why, I may never know the full story, but what is certain is that Shinta now lives a life outside of the world of games. NeverDead is his last credited game. So I ask, what happened to this guy? After 2012, he stopped giving interviews and he disappeared completely. Perhaps he was just another victim caught in the fray of Konami. Maybe he's been exiled into the lower depths of the company, forced to make Metal Gear Panchico machines. Well, I believe he made his exit from Konami sometime after the release of NeverDead, and is probably still out there, working on some mobile game. Now, the last real evidence I could find of him still being alive is a tweet where he weighed in on the whole Konami versus Kojima debacle back in March of 2015. They finally butchers the last goose and picked away its golden egg. Shinta, wherever you are, I just want to say that NeverDead didn't deserve all the negativity that our Western journalists dished out to farm clicks. They are a sensitive bunch, and they don't know a good drive-in B-movie style game when they see one in front of their faces. I found this game to be fun and quite memorable, and I liked returning to it one more time to make this video. Shinta, wherever you are, I just hope you're okay, and above all else, I hope you're still making games. Alright guys, thus concludes a 2-year in the making video, and I hope you hung with it the entire time. It was kind of a Matthew Matosis video essay style video. I'd like to make another one like that, but they're really, really hard to make. They take a lot of time and a lot of research. However, if you do want to see me make more video essay style, like in the defense of, or maybe just like something that's more nuanced and in-depth, then consider donating to my Patreon. Just throw $1 down, tell me in the comments on the Patreon what you like, what you don't like, and I'm gonna listen to it. Before I close out this video, I got 2 big shout outs. One goes out to CK, my very first patron I skipped over in the last video, so apologize, mate. Thank you so much for your contributions. You've been hanging with me for a very long time. Second shout out goes to somebody who's played NeverDead, also a new patron, Canny Boy. Thank you so much. You've been hanging with this channel for a very long time as well. We appreciate you. If you want to join the Hikikomori friends and family on Patreon, I've got Patreon exclusive videos, and I put out my videos a little bit earlier before they launch on my main channel. I want to thank you all for watching. I'll see y'all next time.